Who are you? Is that an important question?
How do we define ourselves? Are we always the same self? How does society define what we should be? What happens if we don't fit that definition? Even though this is the 21st century, and we have seen much progress in many areas of human existence, some groups of people still struggle for an equality of voice. Art is partly a mirror on society, and the art world has its prejudices and hierarchies just like any other aspect of society. We're going to look at some artists who investigate the notion of identity and the struggle for finding a voice. Emotion has always been a subject for art. The kiss, a symbol for love, shows up frequently in art history. These representations of emotion try to somehow express the depth of the human connection. Some of these works are seen as masterpieces of human endeavor. In Rodin's famous sculpture, The Kiss, the participants are unclothed, but we see this as art and not pornography because we understand the nobility of the humanness that Rodin is trying to capture. Images, whether representational or abstract, try to help us to a deeper understanding of this human bond. Why then is this not the kind of painting we would normally encounter in a museum? Why does this painting make some people uncomfortable? Marsden Hartley was a promising young artist who studied in New York and had his first show at Alfred Stieglitz's 291 Gallery, one of the first New York spaces where the new style of modern art was being exhibited. In 1912, he traveled to Europe and made acquaintances with many of the leading avant-garde artists there. In 1913, he settled in Berlin, began a series of paintings inspired by the pomp and circumstance of military pageantry, as well as American Indian iconography. He developed a close relationship with Karl von Freiberg, a German soldier. Freiberg was killed in World War I, and his death devastated Hartley. The many references to Freiberg in the paintings from this period have led some scholars to conclude that their relationship was romantic in nature. The abstract nature of Hartley's references to Freiberg could be simply derived from the style he was using, or could be seen as a kind of hidden code for his affections for Freiberg, as an openly gay relationship would not have been widely accepted in Germany in 1913. Is gender a matter of sexual orientation, or simply another social construct? This is a question some artists ask. Lucy Schwab, born in 1894, began making photographs when she was 18 years old. In 1919, she changed her name to the gender-ambiguous Claude Cahun. She settled in Paris with her lifelong partner, Suzanne Malherbe, who also collaborated in Cahun's writing, sculptures, and collages. In Paris, they came into contact with Henri Mouchot and André Breton, the leader of the surrealist movement. Cahun's photographs use the surrealist style to explore the notion of gender and our presuppositions about it. Keith Haring first became known for his white chalk drawings on blank billboard spaces in the New York City subways. His distinctively graphic style made his work easily recognizable, and along with other graffiti artists of the 1980s, his work moved from the streets to the gallery spaces of New York. An openly gay artist, Haring's work takes on themes of relationships, war, drug culture, and AIDS, a disease affecting much of the gay community in the 1980s. Always a social activist, after he was diagnosed with AIDS in 1988, he established the Keith Haring Foundation to provide funding for AIDS research in various children's organizations. Little Lulu, a cartoon character from the 1930s, is the protagonist in many of David Falk's paintings. He chose her because she exemplifies the never-give-up persona. Even though only a child, she insisted upon being taken seriously in a pre-feminist time. For Falk, she represents both society's conflicts with injustice and his own struggles with being a gay artist who has also been diagnosed with AIDS. Collaborating with his partner, photographer Michael Johnston, they created the character Mrs. Vera. Johnston had also been afflicted with AIDS, and it affected his senses in a way where he almost lost his sight. Looking for something that would rejuvenate him, he created the vivid portraits of Mrs. Vera, played by Falk. These over-the-top photos are meant to celebrate the friends they had lost to AIDS, as well as encourage people to be creative without worrying about the judgment of others. Now a longtime survivor of AIDS, Johnston has taken Mrs. Vera's escapades into a movie called Lost and Found. Catherine Opie is a photographer who explores many aspects of American life. While her body of work consists of photographs of American cities, surfers, and high school football, part of her work consists of portraits of her friends and acquaintances that are outliers, not part of mainstream society. Her portraits of gay and transgender people are both formal, as they reference art historical compositions, and political, as they are meant to bring issues of the LGBT community to the forefront. One would think that with half of the world's population being female, that women wouldn't have to work so hard to have their voices heard. Art history and the museum system have always been dominated by men, and women still struggle for equal opportunity to exhibit their work and be seen as a vital part of cultural history. Imagery that has been traditionally feminine was pushed into the background and considered more craft than art. Why has this feminine influence been seen as one of secondary importance? A group of women artists who call themselves the Guerrilla Girls has taken on this inequality. Using billboards and posters, books and lectures, and donning gorilla masks whenever they appear in public, they challenge the inherent prejudices in the art world. Their work presents some unfortunate statistics about how women and people of color are shut out of the art dialogue. Ana Mendieta was a Cuban-American artist whose work explored aspects of the feminine. In the 1970s, Mendieta created a series of works which she called Earth Body Works. The Sloeta series, which often used her naked body in various performances, explored her relationship to nature, religion, and Cuba. She used blood in her work, which echoed Santeria ritual, but also often took on issues concerning violence against women. In other works, she confronts the idea of beauty and assumptions about gender. Mendieta was married to sculptor Carl Andre. Witnesses later testified to hearing a heated argument between Andre and Mendieta just before she fell to her death from their 34th floor apartment. She was only 37. Andre was tried for her murder but was found innocent. Miriam Schapiro was a leader in the feminist art movement. In the early 1960s, she began experimenting with symbols and materials that would express her various roles as a woman. In the 1970s, along with artist Judy Chicago, she established the feminist art program at the California Institute of the Arts. After this time, her work primarily consisted of collages using fabrics, and employed techniques like sewing and knitting, which were considered traditionally women's practices. She called these works famages. These works contrasted strongly with the decidedly macho techniques of minimalist sculpture that was in vogue at the time. Initially a designer for Mademoiselle magazine, Barbara Kruger uses the techniques of mass communication in her work. Kruger's work often appropriates images, which combine with text, to tackle a range of subjects from consumerism, women's rights, and economic equality. She has also created sculptures, installation, and film. Besides being dominated by the male voice, Western art history has also excluded people of color. As these racist images suggest, racism was, and still is, a significant social issue. Artists whose work explore their own non-white heritage often challenge the validity of the art world status quo. In her American People series from the early 1960s, African-American artist Faith Ringgold takes as her subject a female view of the civil rights movement in America. Later, Ringgold began making quilts that depicted both personal and historical stories of the black culture in America. Her painting, Flag for the Moon, Die Nigger, was painted the year that America landed a man on the moon. It protests the fact that African Americans were still fighting desperately for basic equal rights. Also an activist, Ringgold founded the Ad Hoc Women's Art Committee in 1970 with art critic Lucy Lepard to demand the Whitney Annual Exhibition include at least 50% women. She was also a founder of the National Black Feminist Organization in 1974. Betty Saar and her daughter Allison also deal with the issues of racism and discrimination in America. Betty Saar often uses racist imagery from American history in her work. Confronting the audience with this negative history ensures that the injustice shown to Americans of African descent will not be brushed aside. Her daughter picks up the mantle, and Allison Saar's work also addresses the story of a people stolen from their homes and placed into servitude in America. Frida Kahlo is perhaps one of the best known artists in the world, not only because of her incredible painting, but also because of her tragic story. She suffered terrible injuries as a result of a bus crash when she was 18 that left her in pain her entire life and rendered her unable to have children. While bedridden after the accident, she began painting. Later, she had a tumultuous marriage to painter Diego Rivera, and they both had numerous affairs and fought ferociously with each other. She became an active member of the Communist Party in Mexico and supported Stalinism. On her deathbed, she wrote, "I hope the end is joyful, and I hope never to return." Kahlo is sometimes seen as a surrealist painter, but she denied this association. Her insistence on using traditional Mexican symbols, animals, and costumes in her work was in part to elevate Mexican heritage in the eyes of the world. Also Mexican, both David Gramard Romero and Nahum Zanil are artists whose sexual orientation comes into conflict with the traditional Catholic values of Mexico. Romero's work uses the techniques of the old masters, combined with both pre-Hispanic imagery and the world of lucha libre, or Mexican wrestling. His figures move between the traditional and contemporary, often seeming uncomfortable in the state of flux. Nahum Zanil's work challenges his exclusion from the traditional and religious ritual of his culture because of his sexual orientation. He makes references to Catholic iconography, and his work sometimes takes the form of the ex voto, an offering of devotion or gratitude to a saint. Ziona Benjamin was brought up Jewish in predominantly Hindu and Muslim Mumbai, and now lives in the U.S. Her work addresses her search for reconciliation of these influences in her life. The Jewish tradition of Tikkun Olam, mending the world, is central to her art. The dichotomy between traditional and modern China informs the work of Chinese artist Jiao Bo. His boldly colored paintings express the ambiguity and irony in contemporary Chinese culture. The work we've looked at here are just some examples of work by artists who try to champion their own personal voice and the voices of others who are often silenced by society.
Michael Rennie was ill the day the earth stood still, but he told us where we stand. And Flash Gordon was there in silver underwear,